now we're working at training and training itself, not assessing, not validating that training's occurring, but training itself. Is that correct?
That is what's on my schedule. So let's wing this. No, I'm obviously for our, for the people who are listening to us, realize that yes, we do a lot of impromptu speaking on these podcasts, but it comes from deep, deep, deep experience. Yes, book knowledge, but also applying that book knowledge to what works and what doesn't work. So yes, today is all about training and team development.
Yeah, one of my early mentors was really, really adamant that every project should be a measure of how you've learned and grown through the work. And so he said, ABT, always be training your people, always be training your peers, and always be training yourself. Every piece of work, if you haven't learned from it, has not really contributed what can. Um, training was, again, training was absolutely for him the beginning and end of projects. Um, how about you? How have you actually observed and experienced projects? Is they their primary training exercises, or are they primary ways of getting work done?
I would say primary ways of getting work done, because that's why we pulled together a project team. But something you just said reminded me of an experience I had years ago, early in my, as I became a team lead. But early in my career, and this was frustrating because, when you get into IT, you want to do all the greatest things with the latest and greatest technology, and you want to just be out there on the cusp of what's going on. The project I got put onto was to go into a client site and document their existing system. And the only thing that they had in terms of documentation was the physical code.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
Now, I spent 4 or 5 months. Now, go back to what you just said in terms of training, that every project should be a learning experience, or there should be something that comes out of that. Well, going back into, I think it was COBOL, or maybe it was even assembler, I'm not sure. But going back and creating a system design document by, backwards evaluating it and putting it into writing was frustrating. And yet when I thought about that, I think I put up, it was several months long. When I thought about it later, it truly made me understand what it meant to persevere. Out of that came, by the way, a nice piece of work for their new system, but we had to document their old system first. So it was, even from that unpleasant experience, I was able to train myself on an attribute called patience and perseverance.
Wow, wow. Yeah, that that's important. We don't think about training as working with, as working with these pieces of character, do we? We think mostly of training as building our skill sets.
Right. Right. In fact, think about that. Every time you get on a project and people actually put training into the project plan, so therefore it is a funded activity, what typically makes up that training?
That was a hard lesson for me too. Um, Again, with my friend, always be training. One of the things he liked to do, we were working in silicon products. Basically, the company was a silicon manufacturing company, and we'd have new engineers on projects from time to time, and about 3 or 4 times a year, we go to conferences where they had, they're introducing new products to the world. And one of his training activity was games. And so maybe the evening that they opened up the floor of the conference room for people to meet and greet, he'd say, okay, team members, I'd like you to go out and see how many CXO business cards you can collect.
Hmm.
You need to introduce yourself to each of these CEOs or CIOs and CFOs and see if you can get a business card. And the one with the most business card, I'll give you the best dessert of the evening. And I, he years after, I thought that was really clever because a lot of times you have these new engineers and you think to yourself, how am I going to get them comfortable enough to work in a rather social environment like a project where you're having to debate and protect your ideas and opinions. And again, this isn't trained. They've been to university with all the technology stuff, but the social characteristics that we don't get when we're deep in our skills. Um, these are sometimes some things we forget.
Well, and I'm guessing from that little vignette that you just shared with us, I'm guessing that for those new engineers, that training, and I'm doing air quote, that training by going out and getting CXO business cards was as valuable as going back to the office and looking at the project plan and saying, next week I'm on for Microsoft certification training of some sort.
Oh,
I
oh, oh, yeah, exactly. Definitely. Because again, um, in the way we approached project management was not, you have the project manager and the team, the project manager intercedes between the stakeholders and the team. Even back in the early 2000s, we were saying if you're a team member and there's an executive who has a question, you're expected to speak up if you have the answer. And the more comfortable you are in both your skills as well as in your relationships, the better a team member you'll be.
oh, absolutely. So as we kind of introduce this time, I guess we've introduced fairly well this whole idea of training and team development. What would you say are uh, before we even start thinking about the physical act of training? What are some of the values that we're looking for when we establish a training environment on our project?
It's the primary one is increased capability. Okay, that's basically what you want. You want to do more. You want to do better. You want to do bigger, right? And whether that's the ability to perform your skill or a new skill, the ability to have knowledge, to learn things and to grow in your understanding. And then finally, like what we're talking about, develop as a person, develop what we call attributes, our character and behavior. We often forget that changing our behavior is also a form of training.
Oh, it is. And so if I go back to what you just said in terms of increasing or improving our strengths or our abilities or skills, that then translates into improved results. And therefore, when we do think about the value of training, we really should be training for results. And as important as that Microsoft certification or AW certification or Salesforce certification is, it's just as important to have people understand that they need to have relationships with teammates. They need to be able to write well. They need to be able to present well. They need to be able to do all of these other things just as well as the technical aspects of their jobs.
Well, and yeah, and it doesn't just give them broader and better capabilities. It makes them feel a little bit more comfortable in their work. They feel a little more secure in their ability. They're increasing confidence. So training, includes that value. But also on top of that, um, they have a little more control over their work. Oh, and that gives them again some sense of, I have my feet under me and I can actually direct a lot of my work for myself. And then finally, personal and group fulfillment. There's something to be said about, increasing your abilities. And then from that, I get more satisfaction for my work.
Well, yeah. And something you said also triggered me because I much prefer an autonomous working relationship, meaning, yes, I work with my peers, I work with my management, but I don't want somebody looking over my shoulder all the time. So you're right. Having that sense of confidence, because not only do I have the requisite technical skills, I also have some well-defined team relationship attributes that are part of my quiver. And therefore the two of those combined make me a well-rounded person such that you can trust me to get my work done. Yes, check on me every once in a while, but don't hang over me. Don't look over my shoulder all the time.
And when you give people a little bit of power, like decision making or adding their ideas, responsibility and accountability naturally follows. But second of all, that whole idea of commitment. It's my idea. It's my vote. I'm behind it. Commitment naturally follows after giving them that autonomy. Sure, when we first start off as project managers, I am the manager, I am the leader. There's satisfaction with ourselves. But when we grow and put that out to our group, we start getting people who are more and more engaged and not just workers.
Oh, absolutely. But think about this. So let's say I've got a whole team of people who aren't getting along. How do I train them to get along? I mean, you think about training and, um, relationships. How do we train those attributes that really are part of our makeup as opposed to part of something you go to school for? How
So,
do well, here's another example. I have someone who's chronically late and missing meetings. How do I train that person? Air quotes again, that person to be responsible and thinking about his peers and coming in on time.
So we don't just do it in a classroom. And this is where mentorship and also using the work, basically using the workplace itself as the classroom. You start off mechanically by introducing tools like a team charter. You may not tell them why the team charter's in there, but you say, here, let's agree on these, and these. And then you allow for the formation of the team. You use your knowledge about, how teams grow, like the Tuckman model and the Tuckman ladder. And you look for opportunities to say, hey, we have a little opportunity for growth here. Let's talk about conflict and how conflict works. It's looking for those little teachable moments that are little mini classrooms that happen throughout every day.
That's perfect. I would have answered it very similarly. And I think you struck a chord. We've talked about this several times on our podcast. Comes out also mentorship. You had shared a statistic with me earlier in the week about mentorship, that there's some sort of stat that you quoted that said so many of our workforce don't even have a mentor.
It's surprising. I've this is this is a rough poll I do with all my classes. And one of the questions I ask is, how many of you have somebody around you who has a higher skill or capability or behavior that you'd like to learn, and that you would trust them to teach you? And basically, how many of you have access to formal mentorship? And about 1 out of 6 people are comfortable either with having a structure inside their company or even informally reaching out and say, hey, I'm not so good at this. Can you help me actually here? 1 out of 6. And let's expand this. This is what really blew me away when I first started doing this about 7 or 8 years ago. Um, we're managers, and you don't learn. Well, you don't be a manager. You learn a manager. And so many of these behaviors, you don't learn by picking up a book. You learn it by being around and observing.
So think about that. If 1 out of 6 claim to have some sort of formal mentorship, what an incredible opportunity for improvement to get those other 5 out of 6 into some sort of mentorship role. I know when I was throughout my career, I looked up to someone who could guide me in certain areas. And often informally, I would ask that person to assist. At the same time, I would offer my mentorship to those who are either on my team or on other teams, but nonetheless who were looking for mentorship. And thirdly, and people don't often think about this, my peers, my fellow team leads, my fellow project managers on other aspects of the same project or different projects also became great mentors in terms of ideas or things that they had gone through in their projects that they could share when I was struggling with a certain situation. So as much you said it correctly, we are managers. We should be looking for those opportunities to mentor, but at the same time, any single person in the workforce, or even quite frankly, outside of the workforce that needs to improve in some area should themselves be looking for a mentor.
I think this is what my friend meant. This gentleman was actually formally became a mentor of mine back in 2001, I think, it's the beginning of 2001. And he said, sure, I'll spend some extra time with you. And then we both continued to grow. And we even talk to each other once or twice a month, even today. It's more from a peer basis, but still, we challenge each other, we challenge ourselves, and we share all the fun things that we're doing. It's again, when you're in mentorship, it's almost like Christmas. There is some satisfaction that you have in learning someone, in learning something, right?
Yeah.
But there's even more satisfaction when you can provide that opportunity for others to learn, that little spark of comprehension when they say, hey, this is interesting, or this is cute, or this is fascinating. There's actually a huge amount of satisfaction. This is measurable.
Again, as you were talking, you were spurring ideas in my mind. And I remember very specifically on one project, I had this young woman who was she'd come from the user side of the project and was fascinated with what we did in IT. And she was definitely putting on fun herself that she would be learning this IT thing, as she put it. And so often she'd see me in my office working on something, and she'd come in, she'd knock on the door and says, hey, do you have a few minutes to talk? And I'd say, yes. She'd come in and got so comfortable over time. She'd sit down. She could actually sometimes put her feet up on my desk and say, okay, help me with this. And you know what? Those 15, 20 minutes of me imparting what I knew, and I don't know everything, but I knew enough to help her. Those 15 to 20 minutes proved so valuable, not only to our relationship on the project in terms of getting things done, but she rose into a leadership position where once my job on the project was done, she continued on in the leadership position. It was excellent thing to see, but she was the one who initiated the contact.
Right, right. And think about the benefit she gave to you too. It takes a lot of effort to take what we've learned in the past, and we probably forgotten it, and actually learn how to articulate it in a certain way such that other people can learn from us. The benefit of learning is as much on the side of the mentor as it is the mentee.
Oh yeah. If you're not learning while you're teaching, you're not teaching very well. I teach a weekly class, and I tell the people who are in my class that I'm getting way more out of my teaching than they are, because I've spent so many hours in looking at what I need to be instructing on. So yeah, we as the mentors gain that benefit. Can I suggest something?
Go ahead.
That we are selfish creatures, and this whole mentorship, whether we are being mentored or offering mentorship, appeals to our selfishness.
Oh, yes.
In a wise way.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. The benefit is two-way on that. And a lot of times I feel a little guilty because I get so much more benefit from it. But that just makes me work harder. I do have a question for you.
Sure.
What are you training yourself on right now? Just for fun. Just for fun.
Well, just for fun, part of what we're doing here in terms of these YouTube videos and eventually putting them into a syndicated podcast. Just the whole idea of this podcasting process and eventually providing webinars and perhaps even online courses is something that fascinates me because the technology now is so available. And if not simple, there's someone out there who, for a small fee, will help you with it. So right now it's podcasting, webinars, and I have a lifelong love of public speaking. And therefore, I still continue on in some sort of practice in public speaking. How about yourself?
Handwriting. Printing.
Good one.
I transitioned away from ballpoint, felt tip, and other pens like that, and gone to fountain pens because I'm left-handed and I have horrible handwriting. And a lot of people said, Tim, that I can't read what you're writing, and I'm always looking for opportunities for growth. But then as I studied this, I learned and I followed other people online who are saying, if you're learning how to write, you're slowing down the process of putting words onto the page, which means that you're focusing on the words in a more slower process. And a lot of people who go through this, who are learning how to write carefully, are actually incorporating what they're writing at a deeper level. And I'm starting to experience that. It really is funny. By slowing down in a lot of ways, I'm learning that I'm learning more and deeper.
Well, and you said you were left-handed with a fountain pen. That implies you have to slow down, or you what? Smear the page?
Oh yeah. And there's a whole set of mechanics on how we have to approach writing. And so it takes a lot of technical effort. And I'm just starting to become after about 6 months of work on this daily conscious. The effort that I've applied is just starting to show its results, and it's fascinating. It really is.
Sounds like a lot of fun. Plus, I imagine, and I'm thinking this through now, an article I recently read is they no longer teach cursive, or it's many schools have dropped the whole idea of teaching cursive. And as a result, they're finding that students aren't retaining as much as they used to. When you and I went to school, everything was cursive. And so therefore we retain more. And I think what you just showed kind of proves that out.
Well, yeah, again, here's the thing. It's fascinating because reading is the ability to take the words that were transcribed in a physical structure which is there for as long as you need it to be, and going back and eliciting the knowledge. It's a critical component. But the problem is we've learned, and a lot of experts have validated this, that the internet has taught us how to scan.
Yeah.
Scanning is acquiring the quick knowledge, where reading slows us down and requires not just the gathering and the acquisition of knowledge, but the comprehension that follows after review and review and review and thinking. And these writing drills that I go through are not just like writing 25 times. It's writing paragraphs and often entire sections of books of people that I admire, the old philosophy, literature, and history, and that kind of thing. And so it's forced me to think about these things that I've read many times in the past, and I'm dwelling on them more than just reading or scanning.
Well, and here's what I like about our conversations is that we have a topic today. It's called training and team development. And if someone were to just pick that off of the YouTube and say, oh, they're just talking about, and not really look into what it is, we actually branch off into ideas that foment those sorts of things that aren't just out of a book, right? They come out of our practical experience. And Mr. Left-handed Tim, this came out of left field for me. The fact that being able to teach yourself how to write I guess nicely, let me put it that way, that teaching yourself how to write legibly is actually part of your training regimen. That's incredible.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And I made a vow for myself to just to keep my mind and my body active and growing, to have some type of daily regimen of what did I learn today and where did I grow. This is how important, because of three things. Number one, modern science has proven it to me. Number two, history has proven it to me. The most influential leaders in society have always been learning. And thirdly, the daily practice and experiencing the results of my own efforts have all taught me how this adoption of training as a constant companion in my work and my projects. Uh, and it's like I said earlier, it's not just acquisition of skills. It's learning principles and behaviors and learning a little more control over your experience as well as fulfillment.
Well, and there's that old adage, leaders are readers. If you don't continue to exercise mind, body, soul, spirit, everything else, if you don't continue to exercise that, it atrophies and you become less of a leader and have less success on projects or in other aspects of your life.
That's
But
exactly right.
but let me take this. So we started off with kind of the whole idea of training and mentorship. We went into what we're doing ourselves to keep our minds and our training going. Think about back to perhaps the last few projects that you managed or led. What were some of the ideas in terms of your team development? How much of your time do you think you spent in actually training or working with your team in a other than project work capacity?
Anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours a day, constant, constantly. And you can actually compare that. That means that it's a very small portion of 8 hours to almost 25% of 8 hours every day. I'm working in some type of a coaching or mentoring role.
Even if the person being coached or mentored doesn't realize they're being coached or mentored, you are still, yes.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I apply the Karate Kid method of training, which is wax on, wax off, where people don't realize that they've entered the classroom until I have a little smile on my face.
Well, I was actually doing some reading this morning, and here's what frightened me in some ways that an organization, I think it's called the Employees Skills Survey. That's the name of the organization, did a survey a little while ago, and they showed that as recently as 2019, so this would have been before the pandemic. I don't know what's happened since, but as recently as 2019, that the actual competencies of employees shrunk to their lowest level in 10 years. People have receded in their ability to perform their jobs. And the other part that they said was that a full 5% increase in employees who are not fully competent in their roles.
Now,
I think we're failing those folks if we're not mentoring and training and providing that.
so this is incredibly scary, because when they're using the word competence, they're using it in a very specific way. I know they're using it to represent not just skills, not just attributes, but also knowledge.
Yeah.
This means, where who in finance do I need to talk to? Who's the security expert? Who's the what are the processes for filling out a purchase order? That is part of training too. And if they don't know that, we're getting in a little bit of trouble here.
Well, and one of the things that I was taught, I don't know if it was accurate or not, during my coming up in my career, was that as long as you kept people satisfied with great job fulfillment and great pay, they would stay. And yet people kept leaving. And here's what this same company, different survey, I think, they found that 94% of people would stay with their employer if that employer took a um, interest in helping them develop their career, whether that's through training or mentorship or whatever. 94%. That means we would have almost no turnover if we just paid attention.
Yeah. And let's add to that. Gallup surveys, especially the ones done with Jim Clifton, have said that when we're talking about engagement now, right?
Mhm. Yes.
70% of engagement is under control of the team leader or the project manager. You have more influence over how engaged people are than the people doing the work themselves. You provide them the opportunity for growth. You provide them the satisfaction. You provide them the clarity and roles and responsibility. All these things are under your control, not the workers themselves. They do have some commitment and they have some responsibility for their side of the engagement. But over twice of the influence comes from the leader and what they can provide to the relationship and the understanding of the work of the organization.
When my entire project management career just flashed before my eyes. I, I'm sitting here thinking, how many times have I failed in exactly this arena? How many people left because I did not give them the mentoring or the attention that they deserved and required in order to be retained in the company? You think about that, and I guess part of this podcast and what we can be doing to help those who are listening to us who are younger in their careers is just let's pay attention. Let's make sure that we work with each people where they're at in terms of their abilities or their needs to improve and continue to help them, mentor them, train them, put them in formal training, just those sorts of things that help them not only be retained, but also grow in their careers and in their self fulfillment.
So, besides setting aside time, what do you include in your projects so that you can continue your own training, but also you can increase, or continue the training of the people around you, whether they're peers or your team or even executives? What do you do?
Well, in my case, yes, as we mentioned way back at the beginning of this podcast, formal training, skills level training that they needed for their carrying out their jobs, we put that right into the project plan. So there's no question about that. Funds were set aside, people were trained, time was set aside on the project schedule to allow that to happen. But to answer your question in a different way, in terms of the how do we include some of the other things that weren't formally included in the plan? It's what I found was that I would always have my antenna up in such a way that I looked for opportunities, either where people were struggling or where people were curious or where people were coming out and asking for some additional mentorship or some additional training. And then I also did that for myself. One project I was asked to do something in terms of federal funding. Well, suddenly I gave myself a task to go home and study what is involved in federal funding, came back and asked a few questions, and then I could do my task. But the idea, I think, was I looked for those situations that required it and then acted.
Right, right. A lot of what I do is management by walking around, basically using active listening and observation, and do it. Now, in these enlightened times, that means spending a lot of my meeting time, not just looking at what's being shared and what's being engaged, but how people are interacting with each other and how people are receptive to the knowledge and looking for those confused eyes and the disengagement in the web conferences, and it's fascinating. I've tried to actually increase my ability to do reading body language as well as how they use the technology itself to understand, how can I help them gather what they need. And I'm not focusing just on remote workers. but our office work too relies on these tools so much more that this is just, I understand this is just going to be a facet of how we manage by walking around. We walk around electronically as well as physically.
And yet at the same time, I know from my own experience, I've lost some of that touch point because when I was physically in the office with staff, my management by walking around meant I caught them doing what they were doing well, or I worked with them, but I caught them doing stuff because I was there, right? Now, when we're all behind cameras, and typically the cameras come on when we actually have a scheduled meeting, unless I spend the extra time to hit that call this person button and therefore have an engagement that way, if I don't do that, then I lose out on the ability to manage by walking around in these electronic times.
Yeah, yeah. And I found over the last few years, I've had to rely a lot on delegation, giving up a lot of these things that I thought were my responsibility technically, like gathering and analyzing data. I love doing that, but I've had to actually, hand that over to responsible and more mature members of the team so that I can do that observation and analysis and I can spend the extra time with the relationship building.
Well, what's interesting is right before this podcast, I had a meeting. Wasn't my meeting. I was one of the invitees. And it's interesting, but the person who set up the meeting was late and she was about 5 minutes late. And so myself and another person I had gotten to know only electronically while we've engaged electronically, he and I spent time talking about getting ready for the summer, opening our pools, doing, sort of, and then the meeting started when the facilitator joined. And as she started, I thought, that's what we miss about being in the office. People think of that as being wasted time, but no, that's the relationship building aspects of what it is so that you can work more synergistically together. And so I really miss that part of it because it seems every electronic meeting is cut and dry. You start on time, you end on time, and you talk only business.
There's a lot of wisdom in putting water coolers and coffee stations in the office.
Yes.
And I've thought just to do this, and I thought to myself, if I were a totally remote business like GitHub, right? GitHub prouds themselves by being all remote. And I'm thinking, how would I translate the benefit and value of water coolers and coffee stations into a totally remote environment?
That's a great thought.
Yeah.
And I have numbers of ideas running through my head right now, but that is a opportune thought in terms of what we can do in these pandemic times or post-pandemic times even.
Yeah, and again, this is not just for helping people grow in their skills. It's not just for helping people grow in their behaviors and their character, but it's also sharing knowledge, those little pieces of information that fill in the details of this person is telling me this. And all of a sudden, if you're around them enough, electronically or physically, this is why they're sharing this with me. It gives you that context and that understanding that translates into incredible value in the business.
So when you and I talked earlier, it seems, if I can bring this out of our conversation, it seems that both you and I prefer mentorship as our primary method of training. At least I do. I may be reading into what you had talked about, but do you have a favorite way of training staff or even training yourself?
It's mentorship and it's collaboration. It's looking for little teachable moments throughout the day. Now, of course, if it's a requirement and it's necessary, I'll add more and more formality, right?
Mhm.
Number one, I'll prepare materials and I'll prepare problems that I know that are like exercises for us to work through to demonstrate mechanics and steps, and also specific values and benefits from the outcomes. Okay. And then on top of that, if it needs even more finality, I'll put an entire training structure like you do around it, which is, here we're marketing this. I'm doing the education awareness. I'm putting a commitment where you have to sign up for this. I'm putting some measurement that you're actually attending this. And finally, I have a pre-test and a post-test that demonstrates, number one, you actually have learned something and you can take that skill or attribute or knowledge back to your work. Um, it really depends on the situation. But primarily it's all based on the initial assumption of collaboration, and it's that relationship that we have to work on first.
Yeah, I've actually also one of my favorite aspects besides the mentorship and even sort of an aspect of collaboration, I might call sort of just in time instruction.
Mhm.
And it kind of goes along with the whole management by walking around. And that is, I've noticed that, let's say I'm working with a team and I stop at someone's desk or I have a conversation over a cup of coffee or something. And suddenly I find that everyone or many of the people are struggling with the same situation or same issue. So I'll just say, okay, guys, 1 o'clock, let's go in the boardroom. And I used to have a reputation. If I didn't have a whiteboard marker in my hand, I couldn't speak.
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Pulling into an empty conference room, maybe 3 to 5 or the entire team,
Yeah.
and always having an exercise or an example of a schedule problem, a risk problem, a quality problem,
Yeah.
a leadership and management problem that was similar to what we were going through in the project, so they can work at it, you know, outside of the issue at hand, and then bring what they're learning back to their own work.
Yeah. And I tell you, having, and the other thing is when people can't congregate that way and you're up at the whiteboard drawing and taking ideas, round robin fashion or whatever, what what your audience, your team finds is that they're not the only ones struggling. They're seeing that the other people are struggling. And so instead of having these little holy huddles back in the thing complaining about your leadership, everyone can come forward and say, yeah, I'm having trouble with this, or here's what I found that works. Maybe that'll work for you, Sam, or something, but it's a collaboration. It's a just in time. And suddenly everyone is back on the same page and they feel like they can continue and contribute.
Well, and what you're talking about is in learning, is an education, is something called pairing. It's frightening to actually put two people who need to learn the same skill or attribute together in the training itself, and then let them go to town with it.
Yes.
That's where real innovation comes from, because
Yeah.
of human nature, we all see things and we learn things in different manners. And then with the overlap, and number one, the overlap allows them to build, shared knowledge that's greater than what each individual has learned. Number two, you're fostering a professional relationship. And when you can do that, not just with two people, but with a group, that's the power of collaboration. That's why I invest in actually not being the leader, not being the source of wisdom, but
Right.
allowing the group mindset and taking advantage of the group mindset to actually help us grow, not just in our competencies, but also as a group.
And what I found is some of those relationships which are formed in that way through the common struggle and through the common getting over an issue of a problem is that those relationships last many years into the future. It's amazing how that kind of the struggle cements those relationships and they just maintain.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. My relationships and my project work has fostered relationships that have lasted decades.
Yeah.
And there's satisfaction in that, but there's also satisfaction in the value that these relationships continue to bring.
So as much as we've enjoyed that sort of experience that we've just talked about, have you ever had a situation where you had to just kind of say, no, I'm not going to do this right now. I'm going to walk away because you're not ready.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it's not just because they're not ready to, learn the skill. It's their it's not their ego per se. It's that they just have an understanding. They have a block in their head that say, I can't learn from you. Or I know enough.
Yeah.
Or when they have that understanding that you can't get through, it's an opinion, it's a perception, it's not truth. What it is it's their inability to take the opportunity of that moment and that sharing information to, inspire their own growth. And as leaders, we understand that as we grow and mature, the responsibility of learning is not just, the teacher in the room. It's our engagement in the learning process. And so there are times when I say, like you said, it's not the right time. It's not the right
Well,
time.
and sometimes they're just attitudinally not ready. And they just, I don't know what it is. Sometimes you get people with a chip on their shoulders or with stubborn, I don't know what it is. They may be good workers, but they're not good for the team. And typically they will end up self-sabotaging and end up removing themselves from the team and that sort of thing. But, you just can't sit there and worry about every single person if they're not willing to come and meet you part of the way. So,
Yeah, and again, they weed themselves out.
yeah.
And I've found that they weed themselves out by not growing, and the people around them continue to grow and thrive because of the maturing of the team and the maturing of their understanding. Um, and the others, because they become less and less engaged, they're participating less and less in the work until, either we need to have them replaced, or we find there's other work that they're more effective in.
Yeah. And that's my preference as well, is to find something that they're much more effective in, or that they can collaborate in a more mature, um, more collaborative fashion so that it doesn't disturb my team, but yet I can use their skills elsewhere. So yeah, that's one of my go-tos as well. Cause you want to salvage the individual. You don't want to just, say you're not working out. So see ya.
Yeah.
You don't want to be that callous. So,
One of my friends called it flipping the bozo bit. Basically, I've caught myself saying that person won't get along with me. And all of a sudden, about 12 years ago, I said, hey, I'm 50% of this relationship. I'm Could it be that my behavior and my attitude is contributing to them not being engaged? And so I've left the door open and the opportunity open for everybody around me to continue to grow and to continue to have engagement with. But at the same point, it's the work first, it's the professional environment first, and then we can actually use the training, which is the satisfying part of it for me, to enhance the experience.
well, I didn't really mean to ask that question and end this podcast on a downer, but it just also shows those who are listening and us that not everyone is geared up for success. Not everyone works out, but so we have to be able to handle the good with the bad. And it all comes down to, and what we're talking about is the whole ability to train and to mentor and to develop staff. So
Yeah, and training is a major characteristic of being a leader. You're constantly training others. You're constantly training your peers and your executives. We train up. We don't just train sideways and down. and you're constantly training yourself because it's when you're learning to lead, your first student is you because you don't get to lead others until you've demonstrated that you can lead yourself.
That's exactly right. So, we're going to have to, put an end to this here shortly because we're coming up on time. But, so are you doing anything right now for yourselves that you're just kind of giving yourself sort of that sense of progress? I know you're not necessarily on a project per se, but what are you doing right now to keep those juices flowing and sense of progress in your career?
So, first of all, I have about 4 projects that are ongoing here, and I can even name them. Second, I do engage in project work always. Second of all, I actually adopted this daily ritual of creating a morning stand up and a leaving and an evening retrospective in my work life. And I use that to quantify my personal growth in my work, whether it's project management or whether it's business management or whether it's just, learning how to learn, being efficient with my time and these kind of things. And I I from time to time create formal targets of growth, I assign myself specific education, but mostly I allow my analysis of these 15 to 20 minutes I put at the beginning and the end of the day. I use that to say, "Oh, I need to pay attention to this."
So, if I were to summarize what you just said, you're using a well defined, well honed attribute called discipline to continue to learn and progress on other skills within your project management career.
Yes. Yes.
So, what I do, it's interesting, and I've done this. I don't know if I fell into this by accident or if it's just something I just had to do, but computer science, IT, that has been my entire career. I went to school for computer science. My entire career has been IT, developing systems, implementing systems. And I think part of what I do to keep myself progressing is I do activities that have nothing to do with IT.
Mm.
So, for example, you've heard me mention that I'm part of Toastmasters. Toastmasters is an organization helps develop your ability to speak in public. So I don't care if you're a mother who needs to speak in front of the PTA or a businessman who needs to address the shareholders. Toastmasters helps develop and hone that skill. And so I find that every time I stop speaking, I get rusty. And so being part of Toastmasters is one of those things that helps me to stay less rusty, shall we say. And here's the other part of it is as project managers, your ability to communicate either presentation or in writing. So, when you have to write a speech, you have to write well. So presenting, writing, communicating, that's part of what we do as project managers. So even though Toastmasters in this case is an avocation, it helps me in my vocation.
Yeah. And thirdly, stepping out into unknown territory, working on, continuing to, increase your bravery and your sense of confidence of acquiring new knowledge. This actually is a huge thing. This gets rusty.
Yeah.
If you don't continue to add things that you don't know in life, you become complacent. And like Ray Kroc of McDonald's said, when you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot. Right.
Yeah.
This is what I found with education and training.
Yeah.
I need that inspiration. It's less physical, of course, these days, and more intellectual, but that inspiration still is a requirement in my life.
Well, I tell you what, I'm not sure we've exhausted every avenue of training and team development, but we certainly have had a great conversation today, and we've even some of the sidetracks we've taken have been pertinent to what we do as project managers. So
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I've enjoyed today. Where can we find you during the week if we need to get hold of you, Tim?
You can find me on LinkedIn. So if you want to find me and say hi or ask me a question, that's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. Well, and same for me. So
Very good. Very good. So
we
thank you again for this inspiration. And I appreciate the opportunity to continue to talk with you.
as do I, and I'm sure we're going to come up with another scintillating topic for next week, same time, same channel, same place.
Thanks again, Merv, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.